As a worship leader, it can be really challenging to improve your worship team's playing because you're not just in charge of them, you actually have a role to play as well. So how do we separate those two jobs of playing and singing and evaluating? And I've got a tool for you that I think is the most underutilized and underrated helps for your worship team. Today, we're going to dive in and check it out. Hey, if you're new here, my name's James and I help worship leaders and church sound techs eliminate the mystery and frustration around sound at church. So if that's you, go ahead and mash subscribe and don't ding the little bell. You've already got enough notifications in your life. So if you're a worship leader, you have a multitude of jobs and you have to do a lot of them all at the same time. You're managing all of your band, making sure that they're playing the right parts, making sure that they're in time and in tune and the arrangement fits what your congregation is going to enjoy. You're managing the singers, making sure that they're singing at the right time and singing the right part, and hopefully they're in tune too. On top of that, you have to nail your parts, and in the midst of all of that stuff that you have to manage, you're really supposed to be engaging in worship yourself because people won't go where you don't. So what if you could separate yourself from the situation where your time playing and singing and worshiping could be different from evaluating the band and making sure that everybody's doing everything right? Well, with Virtual Soundcheck, you can. Virtual Soundcheck is a way that you can record all of the multi-tracks or all the individual inputs from your band and then play them back through the live sound console without the band on stage. That way, you've got a bunch of things you can do, but in this video, we're going to be talking about how you can evaluate your band to improve their performance and find the problem areas and the things that they need to practice in order to make your worship team sound better, so then you don't have to focus on that as much. You can more focus on entering into worship. So how can you leverage this tool to improve your worship team? I've got 3 steps for you. The first thing that I suggest you use with Virtual Soundcheck is to improve your monitor mixing. In-ear monitors isolate the player's mix from everybody else. So if it's awful, nobody else can tell. And people are trying to learn how to mix monitors while they're playing or singing. So it's really challenging to mix your monitors and play and sing well at the same time. If you don't want to give up playing and singing well to mix your monitors, people won't do that, and it can be difficult to juggle all of that at once. Add that to the fact that nobody at their guitar lesson or their singing lesson learned how to mix monitors. So using Virtual Soundcheck at the beginning of your rehearsal lets you record a song that you know well and then play it back. Then people can mix their own monitors without having to worry about their instrument at the same time. It also frees up people who are more experienced to come and help those who are less experienced. Sometimes people can ratchet up and up and up and things get louder and louder and louder until it's just a big mess and everything's super loud. To avoid this, somebody with more experience can say, hey, I feel like the electric guitar is too loud in your mix. If we pull that down, now we can hear the other things that we're missing. You can also play with different techniques for setting up your monitor mix. Some worship leaders I know rely very heavily on the crowd mics for their monitor mix, so they can avoid the temptation to pull one in-ear monitor out and have it dangling here, which looks ugly, or the click track gets picked up in their microphone, and then they are only mixing in mono. They don't have both sides of their ears to mix from. That's a big problem that mixing mostly with the crowd mics can help overcome. Another thing you can do is teach people to mix quietly. Mix at a level where they feel like they have to lean in to hear. You can adjust, and your ear will adjust to that difference of level, but when you can lean in and hear everything clearly at a low level, it's much easier on your hearing, especially if you've got long rehearsals or a long morning of worship sets. I've actually had people get chills and tear up a little bit when they finally figured out how to use their in-ear monitor system and they can hear clearly. Some people just suffer a long time with a bad monitor mix and they don't know how to fix it. So even if you've been in in-ear monitors for a long time, do this with your team and make sure that everybody's got a good mix. The second thing that you can do with Virtual Soundcheck to improve your worship team is band evaluation. Leave some time at the end of your rehearsal to play back one of the songs that you played during rehearsal, just to check and see how everything's fitting together. Recordings don't lie, and sometimes we have this different idea of how we sound when we're on stage compared to what it sounds like actually in the room. And not all of that has to do with the sound tech, so don't go blaming people quite yet. Now, there's a big difference between what feels good to play and what sounds good with the team. It's kind of like me dancing. Inside, I think I look awesome, but on the outside, it's just humorous. Listening back to your team, have conversations about the rhythms and the arrangement, the register where people are playing, and all the different tones that they might be producing. Personally, sometimes I feel like a quarter note on the bass feels great, but in reality, the eighth note feels better, or whole notes, but the quarter note just doesn't always fit great. You might also notice that you repeat things in the arrangement a lot more than they need to be repeated, right? Sometimes it feels good to sing it again, but you've kind of lost the congregation eventually. After the fifth one more time through the bridge, it gets a little old. Listening in the room also takes the in-ear monitors out of the equation. Sometimes having a tiny little speaker really close to your eardrum can distort a little bit of how we perceive ourselves on our playing, especially if the balance that we're hearing in our in-ears isn't the same as the balance that works for out in the room. So you might think, oh shoot, I sound like that when you hear your tone out in the room versus when you had your monitors in. Between fixing it at the source or choosing a different mic or mic placement, that's the best place to start for fixing these tone problems that you hear. You might also find that certain players' timing and tuning isn't quite as tight as you'd hoped it'd be. Sometimes this can self-correct, or when your team listens out in the room with you, they hear their timing, they hear the looseness of where their notes are falling, or they can tell, oh, I'm not quite in the center of the pitch right there, and then they work on it on their own. It's fantastic when they can have the self-awareness to self-correct and make changes that fix the problem without you having to say anything. It's a lot easier to listen critically to yourself when you're not actually playing and singing. Now, please remember, when you're going to have a conversation of correction or adjustment with one of your musicians or singers, it's always best to have it in private, because the way that we play and sing as creatives, the way that we mix even as sound techs, it can be easy to take that as our identity, or we're tied up in what we create rather than who God says we are. So in light of treading carefully on that, make sure that the corrections are in private and very kind, right? We want to encourage people to improve, not bash them for not being awesome. In short, value people over their skill. Okay, that rant's over. Well, maybe it's not over. Singers and their pitch and their tone is a very, very tricky conversation to have. So if you have to talk to a singer about maybe they're not quite reaching the center of the pitch on those high notes and it's creating a chorusing effect with the other singers that are singing that same note, be very kind and say, hey, why don't you try this, and give some singing solutions rather than just pointing out the problems, right? Some of them are like raising your eyebrows and standing tall on your toes to get that pitch up. Other times it's a vowel sound issue where they would have an easier time reaching for those higher notes if their vowels were a little narrower instead of wider and like this for their E sounds, right? So we can give concrete things that they can do rather than just telling them where they're making mistakes. Singing is really difficult, and singers can't just go out and buy a new instrument or put new strings on it to make it sound better. It's their physiology, and so they take it very personally with criticism. So just be careful. Okay, now the rant's really over. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. I said this a minute ago, but it's worth repeating. If you have to change something about the tone, start with it at the source or the microphone. Don't change it at the soundboard first. That'll keep you from chasing your tail and creating a whole lot of other problems that have to get undone when we actually fix it or somebody gets a different guitar. We'll just fix it at the source as much as you can. The next thing you might notice when you're listening all together is that something in the arrangement just doesn't work. Sometimes parts that people are playing sound fine on their own, and when they're practicing by themselves, it sounds okay. But when everybody's playing together, things are starting to clash a little bit. It can be a lot easier to notice that when you're listening with Virtual Soundcheck. Maybe your keyboards and guitars are both playing in the same register, or maybe somebody's just playing the wrong chord, but you didn't really notice it. Whatever the problem is, it's a lot easier to isolate it on the soundboard if you just turn off other things and listen to maybe just the guitar and the piano by themselves, or the pad and the acoustic together, and make sure that all the notes are coming together. Now, I've got one more thing that you can do with Virtual Soundcheck, but before I do, I want to tell you about my free Virtual Soundcheck challenge. I put together a free mini video course that walks you through how to set up your computer and your console to get Virtual Soundcheck going. After you've got it set up, there are lessons there on what you can practice at the soundboard to improve your skills. It's absolutely free, and you can sign up for it through the link down in the description below. I've got a bunch of different consoles and digital audio workstations in there, with more coming on the way. The final thing that you can do to improve your worship team is to work on the mix with the sound tech. If you're a worship leader and you're on stage, you cannot accurately hear what the mix sounds like in the room. So to be able to play it back, and yes, it does change when there are people there versus when it's an empty room, but you can get a much better idea with Virtual Soundcheck how the mix sounds and how all the balance and tone considerations are coming together so that you're not guessing about what it's like when you're on stage. Now, if you've listened on stage and popped both your in-ear monitors out and heard what it sounds like, it's a garbled, jumbly mess. All you're hearing is muddy, low frequency. So you might be thinking, man, I need a ton more reverb. So you ask the sound tech for more reverb until it's like an ungodly amount of reverb. And I'm not saying that reverb is sinful, but there can be too much. So then you're asking for things for them to do, but you're not actually hearing what it actually sounds like in real life. So working with the sound tech to dial in like what the balance is between the lead vocal and the background vocals, and how we're going to emphasize different instruments in different songs to be the primary instrument and what instruments can be in the background a little bit more. And to really feel what it sounds like when the acoustic guitar is way out in front of a big part of a song. You need to understand those things from firsthand experience, not on stage wondering what it feels like for real experience. The other thing that this can do is help you to communicate clearly what the style expectations are for the mix and for your sound tech. What your sound tech prefers for style and tone could vary drastically. Some guys might like metal and clubs, other people might like sitting around a campfire with acoustic instruments. But if both of those people are mixing at church, you have to have clear expectations for what it should sound like to fit the style of the song and to fit what style really works for your congregation to help them engage in singing. There can be a ton of variation between how much low end you need and how much low end the sound tech wants. It could be more or less, but you have to figure out what's right, and it'd be hard to communicate what it should feel like when you're on stage. So being with the sound tech in the room, walking around, leaving the sound booth and listening to what it sounds like in different spots, all of that is helpful for dialing in and communicating the things that you're feeling and wondering and thinking it should sound like in your brain, and translating that into an actual mix where real people are listening. Virtual Soundcheck is massively helpful for dialing those things in. For instance, your church's goal might be to make it feel like people are immersed in the sound, right? It's all around them. They can sing loud and sing their heart out, and people around them aren't going to hear them and they'll get embarrassed. That's one way that you can go with how loud you have your mix, and that doesn't necessarily translate into a number on an SPL meter. Another church might have the value of everybody hearing everyone else singing, so you keep the music a little bit quieter, and it feels like the band is up on stage, but it's all of us singing together. Neither one is right or wrong, but you have to define that and make it really clear so that your sound tech knows what the target is that they're aiming at. If you want some help dialing this in and getting clear language for how to lead your church sound team, I developed a guide called How to Lead Your Church Sound Team. You can get it for free through the link down in the description below. So there you have it. Virtual Soundcheck is an absolute game changer, and I don't say that lightly. I don't think everything is a game changer but just because it's new technology, but Virtual Soundcheck does make it possible for you to take your worship team to the next level. If you're a worship leader or a sound tech that's wanting to eliminate the mystery and frustration of sound at church, you've found the right place. Mash that subscribe button, and if you liked this video, mash that thumbs up. Comment below and let me know what's worked well for you with Virtual Soundcheck. And remember, it's all about the low end, avoid the sound tech solo, and nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. We'll see you back here next time on Attaway Audio.